Hello, I'm Jonasz Rawiński and you're watching TVP World Talks, where every word matters. Ukraine is reeling from the impact of the Munich Security Summit. Trump's administration dashed a few hopes, raised a few new ones, and generally caused a fair bit of chaos. As events move at a breakneck pace, Ukraine fears being sidelined in the process. There are compelling reasons for Europe to step up its efforts to make up for America's ambiguity. But how much depends on what Ukraine itself does? Should it hand over its rare earth minerals to the US? Should it risk holding elections during wartime? And can it break through this sudden wave of eerily familiar false narratives that seem to reach as far as the Oval Office itself? Joining us now is Aleksander Olech, Head of International Cooperation at Defense 24. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Good morning. Thank you for the invitation.
So let's begin with the latest news. We've had Sir Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, saying that he would be willing and able to send troops in order to bolster a potential peacekeeping mission in Ukraine once a ceasefire is reached. Do you think that more countries are likely to follow suit and announce that they will also send their troops? And how does it tie in with the recent reports of a questionnaire that was sent to governments in Europe by the US administration, in which they asked specifically, how much can you contribute?
In the past 1,000 days of war in Ukraine, we've been hearing many stories about sending or not sending troops to Ukraine. Many countries in the Central and Eastern Europe are very willing to support Ukraine, but it's very difficult to send in general troops as not part of NATO. As for now, the French Republic, the United Kingdom are very willing to send troops as a part of peacekeeping mission. At the same time, they truly have support of the Baltic states, as we all have heard. Poland is not that willing to support by sending troops, but we have to remember that Poland is in general the hub, this transit crucial point for all help that is going to Ukraine. That includes military help, humanitarian help, at the same time this political diplomatic help. As for now, we have to admit that we are two channels of supporting Ukraine. Or let's put it this way, negotiating on behalf of Ukraine. So the first group is the US and the Russian Federation are going to meet in Riyadh, in the Saudi Kingdom. Second group that consists of the French Republic and President Macron that invited main countries. Main, what does it mean? The countries that are crucial for building up this European deterrence or European capabilities of creating some kind of defense or military capabilities to support Ukraine. Poland is there, but as we have to admit, there is no representatives of the Baltic states or Nordic countries because we recently accepted Finland and Sweden to be part of NATO. But as for now, we're only relying on countries that are willing to help Ukraine with regards to this financial support. So Poland, Estonia, France, Germany were doing that. But now Macron and, for instance, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom are putting pressure on sending troops. So the case is, if we do have this willingness, this power to not only send troops to Ukraine, but at the same time to at some point block what the US and the Russian Federation will decide. After today's meeting in Paris, we will see whether we do have this, multinational cooperation and support in European countries. But at the same time, we have to remember that 2014 was the very first signal, 2022 was the second signal, and now 2025 is the third signal, and we have to react at some extent.
No, of course. I mean, many commentators said, okay, if this is going to be a case of another conference when they say it's a wake-up call. There have been way too many wake-up calls, too few reactions. But coming back to the question of troops, right? What are the estimates of how many troops would be needed to police this arguably very, admittedly very long border between Russia and Ukraine? We shouldn't really call it a border. It will be a demilitarized zone, most likely. situated on the line of contact. So the borders formally will not be moved. I think it's necessary to actually point that out. Still, it is going to be a large area requiring a large number of troops. How many would we need? And how many do you think individual countries are likely to contribute? Do you think that countries like Poland should also contribute troops? Or should they say, we're helping in different ways, and so we actually are not going to do this?
I still do not see any chance to keep those troops as long as we do not have this multinational cooperation agreement that those troops should be sent. Because if it's not under the 5th article of NATO, or if it's not under the 4th article of NATO, or if it's not like multinational cooperation under the European Union umbrella, perhaps we should go under the United Nations idea. But here, we can clearly admit that we saw, for instance, yesterday, what happened to UNIFIL soldiers in Lebanon. So from my perspective, Poland has done so many things to support Ukraine that now it's impossible to send, let's say, 10 or 20,000 soldiers to Ukraine, but it could be acceptable to have some troops, for instance, in the western part of Ukraine. But from my perspective, the most crucial thing is, for how long should we keep those troops in Ukraine? Because if it's for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, okay, we can understand it. But as many conflicts I have seen in the past years, we have to be aware that the Russian Federation or other malicious actors or mercenaries will carry out terrorist activity, attacks on critical infrastructure, cybersecurity attacks within the upcoming years. And that will also happen even though we will put our soldiers on the Ukrainian soil. As for now, I can say that we will protect, for instance, Kyiv or train Ukrainian soldiers in Ukraine, but I do not see this willingness in all European countries to send troops. First of all, we have to expose the threats that are being created by the Russian Federation. Secondly, we have to boost our military capabilities, I mean production. And finally, we can say that we'll defend Ukraine, but without the US support, we have to also admit that Eastern flank zone is very, very let's say, limited in its capabilities to defend borders. What does it mean? We have American soldiers in Romania, we have them in the Baltic states, we have very strong cooperation with new NATO members. So as for now, I would rather see cooperation with Ukraine as giving them military support, and those troops would be the last option. And this option means the Russian Federation understands that cannot attack soldiers of NATO countries, because this is the plot.
Well, of course, but I think the Americans actually said these soldiers would not be covered by NATO Article 5. That was actually one of the conditions. And they also seem to insist that, look, we're not going to send our troops, American troops. Mm-hmm. Europe needs to send their own troops there. Do you think we're going to have a choice? And a related question, can Ukraine even survive without US support? President Zelensky seems to suggest that no, without US support, we're done for.
President Zelensky is having huge pressure also. As you mentioned here, he is just before the presidential election also under this impact of war. However, if we create this image of having European troops on the Ukrainian soil, we will open another challenge. What does it mean? If those soldiers are not under the Article 5 or under the NATO umbrella, does it mean that soldiers in Estonia or Finland that are going to be attacked in the future will not be covered as well? I am quite afraid of seeing the situation where the Russian Federation is carrying out malicious activity, for instance, here in Estonia, where I am now, and they will try to create another war story. They will try to create the atmosphere of threat because they can easily attack soldiers on the Ukrainian soil, and then they can attack other NATO European soldiers in other countries, mainly on the eastern flank zone. So as for now, I reckon that President Macron will put his idea up front that Europe must stand together and then we have to boost our military capabilities, and soldiers, they can be sent but just to support Ukrainian army with regards to logistics and training, and having this 100,000 soldiers, because this is the number we do need, I reckon it's very, very, very limited option as for Ukraine. But we have to put as much pressure before the meeting between Russian and American officials. But this is all about putting pressure on them, and they cannot decide without Ukraine, and they cannot decide about Ukraine without the European Union.
Aleksander Olech was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your insight.
Thank you very much.
And I'm Jan Ślewiński. You're watching TVP World. Please stay with us for more latest news and features.